Hey guys, today we're going to continue with our discussion about combining fiscal and monetary policy at the same time. And this can be a little tricky. You have to really know your tools of both fiscal and monetary policy, but both what to do to expand the economy and what to do to contract the economy if you're going to understand how they work together. So let's talk about, we have to kind of break down which type of fiscal policy and which type of monetary policy. So in our first example, we're going to say that they're both expansionary. So that means that with fiscal policy, we're talking about low taxes and or higher government spending. And then with monetary policy, they're saying that they're either going to be buying bonds or they are lowering the discount rate or lowering the required reserve ratio. So buy bonds, low RRR or low DR. Essentially, they're increasing money supply and doing fiscal policy that is expansionary. Okay, so here's the thing. If you both have both fiscal policy and monetary policy, the thing that expansionary means is that it increases aggregate demand. So if they're both expansionary, you will have an increase of aggregate demand and everything that goes along with an increase of aggregate demand. Higher prices, higher GDP, lower unemployment rates. Because think about the Phillips curve. A rightward shift of aggregate demand would be like an upwards movement on the Phillips curve, and that would be lower unemployments because that's what's on the x-axis of the Phillips curve. You're both in the short run, if they're both expansionary, this is what's going to happen if they're both expansionary. And this is all short run effects. This is what happens in the short run. And here's what gets tricky. If they're both expansionary or both contractionary, we'll get to contractionary here in a second. If they're both contractionary or both expansionary, you know what happens in the short run. And so when it happens, so if they're both expansionary, we know aggregate demand's going up. Ooh, if I can type, that'd be great. There's a lag. We know AD increases and all the things that go along with an increasing AD, like here on the board. If they're both contractionary, let me do this better. It's not what I wanted, but I will take it. There we go. If they're both contractionary, we're talking about this time higher taxes, maybe less government spending for fiscal policy. For monetary policy, it'd be selling bonds, higher, like raising the required reserve ratio or raising the discount rate. We know aggregate demand decreases. And we know that prices go down and GDP goes down and unemployment goes up. We know. And this is both short run. But let's talk about in the long run. In the long run for both of these policies. Let's go back and look at if they're both expansionary. Expansionary fiscal policy expands the economy, raising aggregate demand. Expansionary monetary policy also raises aggregate demand. But in the long run, they're going to have different effects on long-run economic growth. Because expansionary monetary policy lowers the interest rate because it increases money supply and money supply shifts to the right and interest rates fall. And we know that in the long run, low interest rates grow the economy. So expansionary monetary policy in the long run with low interest rates grows the economy in the long run. So in the long run, monetary policy grows the economy. Expansionary. But let's talk about fiscal policy. Do you remember the whole story about how expansionary fiscal policy, how it affects the long run? Do you remember what expansionary fiscal policy creates for the government? If the government spends more than what it collects in taxes, it creates a deficit. Does anyone remember what deficit spending does to interest rates and the whole story of crowding out? Crowding out raises interest rates. Deficit spending, which is what expansionary fiscal policy is, creates a deficit. And deficit spending doesn't lower the interest rate with crowding out. That's the whole story of crowding out. It raises the interest rate. So in the long run, expansionary monetary policy increases the economy and grows the economy, and the PPF curve shifts to the right. But expansionary fiscal policy with crowding out shrinks the economy. So expansionary fiscal policy in the long run, specifically in the long run, in the short run, they both expand the economy. But in the long run, the economy shrinks for expansionary fiscal, and the PPF curve shifts to the left. So which one happens? We don't know. We know what happens in the short run. That recessionary gap is going to be closed. We know that aggregate demand is going to go up and prices go up and GDP goes up and unemployment falls. But in the long run, each of those policies has a different effect on interest rates, and interest rates is what really grows the economy. Fiscal policy here raises interest rates while monetary policy lowers them. And we have no idea which one outweighs more. Is it growing by a little bit and shrinking by a lot, or is it vice versa? Or is it canceling out completely? I have no idea. So in the long run, interest rates are changing and going both ways. So interest rates are indeterminate. Meaning, is that spelled right? Indeterminate, which means we cannot tell what's happening with interest rates, and therefore we cannot tell what happens to the long-run economy. Does it grow? Does it shrink? I have no idea. What happens to our PPF curve in the long run? Not a clue. And so interest rates are indeterminate, which means long-run eco growth, which is based off those interest rates, is indeterminate. So I know what happens, I know what happens in the short run if you have both expansionary. The economy will expand, aggregate demand will shift to the right. But what happens to long run economic growth? What happens to our PPF curve? What happens to the accumulation of capital and production? Not a clue. Because interest rates are going one way here, a different way with monetary policy, and I have no idea. And the exact same is true about if they're both contractionary. Like we just said, both contractionary. We have aggregate demand. This is both contractionary. Aggregate demand is going to fall because they're both going to contract the economy, which means price level goes down. We know that GDP is going to go down and unemployment rates are going to go up. But interest rates, well, just like when they were both expansionary, contractionary monetary policy contracts the economy, raises interest rates. But contractionary fiscal policy is not crowding out anymore, it's crowding in. Where now interest rates are going down. So if fiscal policy makes interest rates go down here and monetary policy makes interest rates go up, interest rates are indeterminate once again because the exact opposite is true from both expansionary. Expansionary, they were like this, now they're like that. They still have no idea what's happening, but the interest rates are going in opposite directions. So in the long run, interest rates are indeterminate. And long run growth, which is based off those interest rates, also indeterminate. Okay. So that they both match. No, I know the short run, but I don't know the long run. Of course, what they are different. Expansionary expands while contractionary contracts. That makes sense. But we don't know what happens in the long run for both. So you either know short run effects or you know long run effects. You don't know both. So if they're both expansionary or both contractionary, you know what happens in the short run, but you don't know what happens in the long run. Well, what about if the policies don't go together? What if one's expansionary while the other one's contractionary? So let's talk about this. This is where it kind of gets a little tricky. So let's say that this time it is expansionary fiscal policy, which means expansionary fiscal policy that is low taxes and more government spending, and contractionary monetary policy, which is like basically less money supply, whether they're doing bonds or I'm not going to say all the tools, but in general, less money supply. There you go. So what happens in the short run? Well, I have no idea. If you have expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy, expansionary increases aggregate demand. Contractionary decreases aggregate demand. And I have no idea which one outweighs the other, which one's has a bigger effect on aggregate demand. So I don't know aggregate demand. And anything that happens that's affected by aggregate demand, I also don't know, like price level or real GDP or the unemployment rate. All of those are now indeterminate because I have no idea which of these policies has a bigger effect or if they completely cancel each other out. I have no idea. One's expansionary, one's contractionary. I don't know which direction aggregate demand is going to go. And so AD, price level, GDP, and unemployment rates are now all indeterminate. So before I knew the short run, but I didn't know what happened in the long run. Now, when the policies don't agree with each other, I don't know the short run and I do know the long run. Okay, so what's going to happen in the long run? I want to, I want this to be a B or an A. There. Ugh, one's capital, one's whatever, it's fine. Oh, no. Okay, I'm going to see. Whatever. Okay. In the LR. Let's talk about it in the long run now. All right. Hopefully you remember by now, because it's been beaten into your head like 1,000 times, expansionary fiscal policy causes crowding out, which is deficit spending and higher interest rates, the combination of the fact that deficit spending leads to higher interest rates. So expansionary fiscal policy raises the interest rate with crowding out. Contractionary monetary policy, the whole purpose of contractionary monetary policy is to raise the interest rate by having less money supply. Interest rates are both higher on both. They match now. Now they're agreeing with each other. And that's going to affect long-run economic growth because that's like, this is where short run stops. And like interest rates and the effect of interest rates on things, that's long run. That takes time. So interest rates are both going up, which means less loans, less capital stocks, and the long run growth of this economy is going to go down, and our PPF curve is going to shift to the left. And so when fiscal policy is expansionary and monetary policy is contractionary, bad things for long-run economic growth. I have no idea what's going to happen in the short run, but I know the economy is going to shrink in the long run. So if you have low taxes and like the selling of bonds by the Federal Reserve, this is a bad future, and I don't want to live in this economy. So in the long run, interest rates go up for both policies, which means long-run growth decreases and the economy will be worse off. The PPF curve will shift to the left. Okay. What about the exact opposite? Before we had expansionary fiscal and contractionary monetary. Now we're going to flip. We're going to say contractionary fiscal and expansionary monetary. Contractionary fiscal policy, remember, is high taxes. I can't type. Or less government spending. And expansionary monetary is more money supply. That's not right. More MS, money supply. Okay, so one's expansionary, one's contractionary. Going back to our little board here, all I'm doing is flipping these letters. Now we have contractionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy. Well, contractionary fiscal lowers aggregate demand. Expansionary monetary increases aggregate demand. Those two don't agree with each other, so I have no idea what happens in the short run with aggregate demand. So in the short run, AD is indeterminate. Price level, which is based off of AD, is indeterminate. Real GDP even. And unemployment. Woo. And the unemployment rate, UE. They're all indeterminate. Because one is going to shift aggregate demand to the right, the other one's going to shift aggregate demand to the left. I have no idea which one outweighs the other, but I do know what happens to interest rates in the long run. You probably could have guessed where this is going. Ooh, I had a typo. Sure. All right. In the long run, let's talk about contractionary fiscal policy. In the long run, contractionary fiscal policy, where the government brings in more money and spends less of it, they have a surplus. They don't need to take out loans, which means interest rates are actually going to fall with contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy, which increases money supply, also causes interest rates to fall. Both of these will decrease the interest rate in the long run and grow the economy. Long run eco growth is going to go up because businesses are going to be able to take out more loans because loans are cheaper because of interest rates, and the PPF curve is going to shift to the right and everyone is better off. I have no idea what happens in the short run, but I do know that this economy will be successful and have more productivity and production in the long run if we have these two policies together. So in the long run, interest rates go down for both policies. Oh my God. And because of that, the long run eco growth will go up. And the PPF curve will shift to the right and everyone will be better off. And people are thinking like, well, if we know that this is the case, why don't we constantly have this? Because we vote and we live in the short run. And this short run, I don't know what's going to happen. And that fear can cause problems. And most people don't know, most people don't know economics, but most people also don't think that far ahead in the future or think like that's a future me problem. The long run happens, so can't fight that. Okay, so here is just a little recap. When they both are expansionary or both are contractionary, I know what happens to aggregate demand, but I don't know what happens to interest rates. When one's expansionary and the other one's contractionary, I don't know what happens to aggregate demand, but I do know what happens to interest rates. And what happens to interest rates is think of like whether you want to think of fiscal or monetary policy, all you got to do is know one, just because the other one's going to match it. So you don't have to memorize what they both do, because if they're going to match it in this example, maybe just know that that contractionary, the high taxes and more money supply is going to be the best one for long run economic growth. Okay, so this was a little bit much. I understand that, but it is usually this is 2 days worth of class. So probably done lecturing for a while, and I'll just give you some practice to implement these ideas. So have a great day, and I will see you guys later. Bye.